The champagne glasses caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Austin high-rise, casting tiny rainbows across the mahogany conference table. I watched Jake Carter adjust his new Armani tie for the third time in 5 minutes. That nervous habit he'd developed whenever he was about to get something he didn't deserve. The irony wasn't lost on me that exactly 18 months ago I'd been planning to toast his success at Skyline Austin, complete with his favorite bourbon and a speech I'd rehearsed in the mirror for weeks. Now I was about to toast something entirely different. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying that forced confidence that fooled everyone except me. "I didn't expect to see you here today." I smiled. The kind of smile I'd perfected over the past year and a half. Serene, professional, with just a hint of something he couldn't quite place. "Oh, Jake. I wouldn't miss this for the world." The Austin Business Journal photographer adjusted his lens, preparing to capture what everyone in the room believed would be a simple corporate acquisition announcement. They had no idea they were about to witness the final move in a chess game that began the moment Jake Carter decided to destroy my life on Valentine's Day, believing I was just another naive girl who would quietly disappear into his past. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he'd been. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Michelle Torres, and if you told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting in the penthouse conference room of the Frostbank Tower, wearing a custom-tailored blazer that cost more than Jake's monthly car payment, about to finalize the acquisition of his entire division, I would have laughed until I cried. Back then, I was the girl who brought homemade cookies to office meetings, who stayed late to help coworkers with their presentations, who planned surprise parties and remembered everyone's birthdays. I was the girl who believed that loyalty and love were reciprocated, that hard work was rewarded, and that the man you'd been with for 3 years would choose you over a 26-year-old blonde with a business degree and the moral flexibility of a politician. That girl died on February 14, 2023, at approximately 7:42 p.m., in a dimly lit corner booth at Meridian Bistro, when Jake Carter looked me in the eye and told me he was leaving Austin with Madison Kelly instead of me. What rose from her ashes was something entirely different. Someone who understood that in this world, you either write your own story or become a footnote in someone else's. The conference room hummed with the quiet energy that accompanies big money changing hands. Patricia Sullivan, CEO of Next Gen Solutions, and the woman who'd become my unlikely mentor, sat at the head of the table with the composed authority of someone who'd built a tech empire from her garage 15 years ago. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her navy suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but it was her eyes that commanded attention. Sharp, calculating, missing nothing. She'd been the first person to see potential in me beyond my ability to organize office birthday parties and coordinate client lunches. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia began, her voice cutting through the subtle conversations that had been filling the space. "Thank you all for joining us today for what I believe will be a landmark moment for both our companies." Jake shifted in his seat, and I caught the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. 18 months ago, he'd been the golden boy of Next Gen Sales Division, the charming closer who could talk a client into doubling their contract over drinks at the Four Seasons. He'd strutted through the office like he owned it, collecting admiring glances from the younger female employees and backslaps from the older men who saw him as their protege. Now, he looked like a man who'd aged 5 years and 18 months. Which, considering what those months had brought him, was probably accurate. Madison sat beside him, her manicured fingers drumming silently against her leather portfolio. She still looked polished, her blonde hair still perfectly styled, her makeup still camera-ready, but there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a brittleness that suggested the fairy tale hadn't quite unfolded as she'd imagined. The woman who'd once giggled through client presentations now carried herself with the desperate composure of someone trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "As you know," Patricia continued, "Taurus Strategic Solutions has been our primary marketing consultant for the past year, revolutionizing our client acquisition strategy and exceeding every projected milestone." She gestured toward me with a smile that held genuine warmth. "Sarah Torres has built something remarkable in a very short time. Taurus Strategic Solutions. My company." The name still sent a thrill through me, even though I'd been hearing it in boardrooms and conference calls for months now. 18 months ago, I'd been Sarah Torres, marketing director, planning farewell parties for unfaithful boyfriends, and believing that being indispensable meant job security. Now I was Sarah Torres, CEO and founder of the fastest-growing marketing consultancy in Austin, with clients across 3 states and a waiting list that stretched into next year. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'd learned to read his micro-expressions during our 3 years together, back when I thought understanding him was a romantic skill rather than a survival technique. The muscle that twitched just below his left ear when he was angry but trying to hide it. The way his nostrils flared slightly when someone else was getting attention he believed belonged to him. The subtle shift in his posture when he felt threatened, like a predator, trying to decide whether to attack or retreat. What many of you don't know, Patricia said, and I felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that came before a perfectly executed reveal, is that Sarah's success with our company has led to an even more exciting opportunity. The photographer's camera clicked softly, capturing what would become the business section's lead story in tomorrow's Austin Business Journal. The headline was already written, though Jake didn't know it yet. Local marketing prodigy acquires former employer's sales division in strategic expansion. Taurus Strategic Solutions has agreed to acquire NextGen's entire West Coast sales operation, Patricia announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who just watched a perfectly orchestrated plan come to fruition. This includes all client contracts, personnel, and operational assets currently based in our San Francisco office. The silence that followed was exquisite. I watched Jake's face transform as the implications hit him, like watching someone realize they'd been swimming in shark-infested waters. His promotion to head of West Coast sales, the position he'd sacrificed our relationship to secure, the golden opportunity he'd moved across the country to claim, now meant he worked for me. Madison's carefully applied foundation couldn't hide the way the color drained from her cheeks. Her drumming fingers stilled completely, and she stared at me with the expression of someone who just recognized a predator they'd previously mistaken for prey. Sarah will be personally overseeing the integration process, Patricia continued, clearly enjoying the moment as much as I was. She'll be evaluating all current contracts, personnel performance, and operational efficiency to determine the most strategic path forward. I stood, smoothing my skirt with the same calm precision I'd once used to arrange conference room refreshments. The difference was that now, people hung on my every word instead of barely noticing my presence. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I'm excited about this opportunity to work with such a talented team." My gaze found Jake's across the table, and I let my smile warm just a fraction. "I'm particularly looking forward to reviewing the San Francisco operations performance metrics from the past 18 months. I believe there's tremendous potential for improvement." Jake knew exactly what those performance metrics would show: the declining client retention rates, the missed sales targets, the complaints about unprofessional conduct that HR had been quietly documenting, the financial irregularities that had been attributed to quote, adjustment period challenges, but looked suspiciously like gross mismanagement when viewed through the lens of due diligence. "I'm sure we'll work very well together," I continued, letting my eyes linger on Jake just long enough to see him swallow hard. "After all, we have such a strong foundation of trust and understanding." The photographer's camera clicked again, capturing the moment for posterity. In tomorrow's paper, it would look like a cordial business handshake between professionals. Only 3 people in that room knew it was actually the final move in a game that had been 18 months in the making. Tyler Morrison, Jake's former peer and longtime rival, cleared his throat. "This is certainly an unexpected development," he said, and I could hear the barely suppressed glee in his voice. Tyler had never forgiven Jake for landing the San Francisco promotion that Tyler had been certain was his. "Will there be any immediate changes to personnel or structure?" "All personnel decisions will be made based purely on performance and merit," I replied, my tone suggesting that this was the most natural thing in the world. "I believe in creating an environment where the most dedicated and ethical employees can thrive." The word ethical hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's breathing had become noticeably shallow, and a fine sheen of perspiration was forming along his hairline, despite the conference room's aggressive air conditioning. "Of course," Tyler said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm sure everyone appreciates working for someone who values integrity." Madison finally found her voice, though it came out higher and tighter than her usual cultivated smoothness. "What about existing contracts and client relationships?" she asked. Some of those took months to establish. I turned my attention to her with the same polite interest I might show a junior employee asking about vacation policies. Existing contracts will absolutely be honored, I said, though we'll naturally be conducting a comprehensive review of all client interactions to ensure they meet our standards for professional excellence. The implication was clear. Every email, every client dinner, every interaction would be scrutinized. In an industry where reputation was everything, that kind of review could be career-ending for someone who'd built their success on charm rather than competence. Daniel Chen, the VP of sales who'd hired Jake and championed his promotion, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah, I have to ask. This seems like a significant departure from your usual consulting work. What prompted the move into acquisitions? It was a fair question, and one I had been prepared for. Sometimes opportunities present themselves in unexpected ways, I said. When Patricia approached me about this possibility, I realized it was the perfect next step for Tora Strategic Solutions. We've proven our ability to optimize marketing strategies for tech companies. Now we can demonstrate our capacity to optimize entire sales operations. What I didn't say was that Patricia had approached me because I'd approached her first 6 months ago, with a proposal so thoroughly researched and strategically sound that she'd agreed to it within a week. What I didn't mention was the countless hours I'd spent analyzing market trends, studying acquisition models, and building financial projections that proved Tora Strategic Solutions could not only afford this purchase, but turn it into a goldmine within 2 years. Jake finally found his voice, though it sounded strained. Sarah, this is quite a surprise. I had no idea you were interested in expanding into sales operations. There are a lot of things about me you never knew, Jake, I replied, my tone pleasant and conversational. I've learned that people often underestimate what others are capable of achieving when they're properly motivated. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket. Everyone present understood that business was personal in Austin's tight-knit tech community. But this felt different. This felt like watching a chess master reveal that what everyone had assumed was a friendly game had actually been a championship match. Patricia glanced at her Cartier watch and smiled. I think that covers the major points for today's announcement. The legal teams will handle the paperwork, and Sarah will be in touch with the San Francisco team about the transition timeline. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I believe Austin Business Journal would like a few photos, and then we can all celebrate this exciting new chapter. As everyone began to gather their things and engage in the small talk that followed major business announcements, Jake lingered by his chair. I could see him calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to salvage something from this wreckage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Madison had already hurried from the room, probably to call her headhunter or update her LinkedIn profile. Sarah, Jake said quietly, stepping closer as the room began to empty. Can we talk privately? This doesn't have to be complicated. I looked at him with the same polite attention I'd give any employee requesting a moment of my time. Of course, I said. My assistant can schedule something for next week. I believe we'll have quite a lot to discuss once I start reviewing the San Francisco operations files. The casual mention of my assistant hit him like a physical blow. 18 months ago, I'd been the one scheduling other people's meetings, coordinating their travel, making sure their presentations were perfect. Now I had someone doing that for me, along with a corner office, a 6-figure salary, and apparently, the power to buy and sell the career he'd thought was untouchable. Sarah, please, he said, and for a moment, I heard an echo of the man I'd once loved. We used to mean something to each other. This doesn't have to be about revenge. I tilted my head slightly, considering his words with the same careful attention I'd learned to apply to contract negotiations and market analysis. Revenge? I said softly. Jake, this is just business. Surely you, of all people, understand that sometimes you have to make difficult choices for the sake of your future. The words were his own, thrown back at him with surgical precision. They were the exact phrase he'd used in that corner booth at Meridian Bistro, when he'd explained why he was choosing Madison and San Francisco over me and the life we'd built together. When he'd told me that I needed to understand that business was business, and feelings couldn't get in the way of opportunity, his face went pale, and I saw the moment when he finally understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't even just success. This was the conclusion of a story that had begun the night he'd walked away from our table, leaving me with a $50 bottle of wine and the ruins of everything I'd believed about love and loyalty. "I'll see you in San Francisco next week," I said, extending my hand for a professional handshake. "I'm looking forward to working together again." He took my hand automatically, his own cold and slightly damp with perspiration. As our palms touched, I wondered if he remembered the last time we'd held hands, in the parking lot of Meridian Bistro, when he'd squeezed my fingers and told me he hoped we could still be friends. "Welcome to Torres Strategic Solutions," I said, my smile as bright and professional as any I'd ever given a new client. "I think this is going to be a very educational experience for all of us." February 14th, 2023, started like every other Valentine's Day I'd shared with Jake Carter. I woke up early to make his favorite breakfast: Belgian waffles with fresh strawberries and that expensive maple syrup he loved but never bought for himself because it cost $18 a bottle. The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of my South Austin loft, casting everything in a warm golden glow that made even the industrial pipes running along the ceiling look romantic. I hummed while I cooked, my silk robe dancing around my legs as I moved between the stove and the counter, checking my phone periodically for the good morning text that always came by 7:30. By 8:15, when Jake still hadn't responded to my 3 messages, I started to feel the first flutter of unease in my stomach. But I pushed it down, convincing myself he was probably just nervous about tonight. After all, I'd been dropping hints about the Tiffany ring I'd admired during our Christmas shopping trip, and Valentine's Day seemed like the perfect time for Jake to finally take that next step. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for 8 months, and everyone we knew treated us like the couple most likely to end up married before 30. The reservation at Meridian Bistro had taken me 6 weeks to secure. It was the kind of restaurant where politicians brought their wives and tech moguls entertained investors, with soft lighting, impeccable service, and a wine list that read like a luxury car catalog. I'd specifically requested the corner table overlooking the Austin skyline, the same table where Jake had told me he loved me for the first time 2 years earlier. Everything was perfect, down to the red dress hanging in my closet that Jake had complimented at Emma's holiday party, saying it made me look like a movie star. When Jake finally texted at noon, it was a simple, "Running late today, see you tonight," which felt rushed and impersonal, but not alarming. He'd been working longer hours lately, preparing for what he called big changes at NextGen that would set us up for the future. I'd assumed he meant a promotion or a raise, something that would finally allow us to start seriously planning our wedding. In my more optimistic moments, I'd imagined him using his bonus to buy the ring, maybe even plan a surprise engagement party with our friends and family. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations. I spent an hour at the salon getting my hair styled in loose waves, the way Jake liked it. I picked up the dry cleaning, including Jake's favorite charcoal suit that I'd had pressed specially for tonight. I even stopped by the liquor store to buy a bottle of Dom Perignon for later, thinking we'd have something to celebrate. The woman at the counter smiled when she rang it up, commenting on how lucky my boyfriend was to have someone so thoughtful. If only she'd known. By 6 o'clock, I was ready and waiting in the living room, my hands smoothing my dress nervously as I watched the clock. Jake was supposed to pick me up at 6:30 for our 7 o'clock reservation, which would give us just enough time to arrive fashionably on time without rushing. When 6:30 came and went without any word from him, I called his phone and got voicemail. When 7 o'clock passed, I called again. By 7:15, I was pacing the hardwood floors in my heels, leaving tiny scuff marks that I'd notice weeks later and realize were the physical evidence of the last moments of my old life. He finally called at 7:25, just as I was debating whether to call Emma or drive to the restaurant alone. His voice sounded strange, distant in a way that made my stomach clench with dread before he even spoke. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I can't make it tonight." "What do you mean you can't make it?" I asked, sinking onto the leather couch we'd picked out together at Room and Board. "Jake, it's Valentine's Day. We have reservations." "I know, and I'm sorry, but something came up. Something important." "More important than Valentine's Day? More important than us?" The questions came out sharper than I'd intended. But 3 years of patience and understanding were starting to crack under the weight of his increasingly frequent absences and cryptic explanations. There was a long pause, and in that silence I heard background noise that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Female laughter. Bright and carefree, and definitely not coming from his office. In that moment, sitting in my carefully chosen dress in our carefully decorated apartment, I knew with horrible certainty that my perfect Valentine's Day was about to become something else entirely. "Sarah, we need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at Meridian? I know you probably already canceled the reservation, but—" "I didn't cancel it," I said quietly. "I've been waiting for you." Another pause. More laughter in the background. And then Jake's voice, muffled as if he was covering the phone. "Madison, give me a minute." Madison. Madison Kelly, the new sales associate who'd started at NextGen 6 months ago, with her perfectly blown-out blonde hair and her MBA from UT's business school. Madison, who always seemed to need Jake's help with client presentations and who had a habit of touching his arm when she laughed at his jokes. Madison, who I'd been polite to at office parties, even though something about her smile always made me feel like she was laughing at a joke I wasn't in on. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Jake said, his voice crisp and businesslike, as if he was scheduling a client meeting rather than destroying his girlfriend's life on the most romantic day of the year. I sat in that silent apartment for exactly 5 minutes after he hung up, staring at the champagne bottle on the kitchen counter and the takeout menus we'd left scattered on the coffee table. Then I stood up, grabbed my purse and car keys, and drove to Meridian Bistro with the windows down, and Adele turned up loud enough to drown out the sound of my own thoughts. The hostess at Meridian looked confused when I arrived alone, checking her reservation system twice before leading me to our corner table. The restaurant was packed with couples leaning across candlelit tables, sharing desserts and gazing into each other's eyes with the kind of dopey romance that I'd been part of just that morning. I ordered a glass of wine and tried to ignore the pitying glances from the servers, who clearly recognized the signs of a woman who'd been stood up on Valentine's Day. Jake arrived 37 minutes late, looking like he'd dressed in a hurry. His hair was slightly mussed, his tie crooked, and there was something about his expression that reminded me of a teenager who'd been caught sneaking out past curfew. He slid into the seat across from me without meeting my eyes, signaling the waiter for a whiskey before he'd even settled into his chair. "Sarah," he began, and I could hear him trying to inject warmth into his voice. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I said, my own voice sounding strange and formal in my ears. "You look like you've had an interesting evening." He had the grace to flush slightly at that, his fingers drumming against the white tablecloth in the nervous pattern I'd learned to recognize as his tell when he was about to lie to me. We'd been together long enough that I could read his moods like weather patterns, though apparently I'd been misreading quite a lot of them lately. "Listen, Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago." The waiter appeared with Jake's whiskey, and he took a large gulp before continuing. Around us, the restaurant hummed with the soft conversations of other couples, the clink of silverware against china, the muted jazz playing from hidden speakers. It was the kind of atmosphere designed for proposals and anniversaries, not for the kind of conversation I could feel approaching like a storm front. "I've been offered a promotion," Jake said, his words coming out in a rush. "Head of West Coast Sales. It's based in San Francisco, and it's a huge opportunity. Life-changing money, Sarah. The kind of position that could set us up forever." For a moment, I felt a rush of excitement and pride. This was what all those late nights and missed dinners had been leading to. This was the big break Jake had been working towards since we'd met. "Jake, that's incredible," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "When do we leave? When do you start?" But instead of squeezing my fingers back, Jake pulled his hand away and I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. "That's what I need to talk to you about, Sarah. The thing is, I don't think this is going to work. Us, I mean. I don't think we're gonna work." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs and making the elegant dining room around me swim slightly out of focus. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "I mean, I think we want different things. I think we're in different places in our lives. I think... He paused, took another gulp of whiskey, and then looked directly at me for the first time since he'd sat down. I think I've been fooling myself about what I really want. And what do you really want, Jake? The question came out steadier than I felt, and I was proud of myself for not crying. Not yet. I want someone who understands ambition. Someone who gets that sometimes you have to make hard choices for the sake of your future. Someone who... He trailed off, staring into his whiskey glass as if it contained the answers to life's great mysteries. Someone who what? I pressed, though part of me already knew what was coming. Someone like Madison. The name hung between us like a live wire, crackling with all the implications I'd been trying to ignore for months. The late nights when Jake claimed to be helping her with presentations. The weekend work sessions that somehow always involved just the two of them. The way she looked at him across the conference table during Monday morning meetings, like they shared secrets that no one else was privy to. How long? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Sarah, how long, Jake? He finished his whiskey in one gulp and signaled for another. 3 months. Maybe 4. It happened, Sarah. We didn't plan it. 4 months. 4 months of coming home to me every night. Of sleeping in our bed. Of making plans for the future. All while conducting a secret romance with his 26-year-old coworker. 4 months of me cooking his favorite meals and doing his laundry and listening to him complain about work stress, never knowing that his stress had nothing to do with deadlines and everything to do with managing 2 relationships simultaneously. So when you said you were working late, I began. Sometimes we were working, but sometimes... He shrugged as if adultery was just another item on his to-do list. And she's going to San Francisco with you. It wasn't a question, and Jake didn't pretend it was. She's being transferred too. It makes sense, Sarah. We work well together, and the company wants to keep successful teams intact. Successful teams. As if their affair was just good business strategy, as if breaking my heart was simply the cost of corporate efficiency. I see, I said, taking a sip of my wine and discovering that it tasted like nothing at all. And you decided to tell me this on Valentine's Day because... For the first time since he'd sat down, Jake looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because I'm leaving next week. Because I couldn't keep lying to you. Because you deserve better than this. I deserve better than this, I repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. You're right, Jake. I do deserve better than this. I deserve better than a man who spends 4 months cheating on me and then breaks up with me on Valentine's Day in a public restaurant so I can't make a scene. Sarah, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? The laugh that escaped me was sharp and bitter, drawing glances from nearby tables. You just told me that you've been living a double life for a third of our relationship, and you're worried about me making things harder? Jake glanced around nervously, clearly regretting his choice of venue for this conversation. Look, I know you're upset, but you have to understand. I have to understand what? That you fell out of love with me and into love with someone else? That you decided our 3-year relationship was worth less than a promotion? That you've been lying to my face for months while I planned our future? Sarah, keep your voice down. Why? Afraid someone might overhear and realize that Austin's golden boy isn't quite as perfect as he pretends to be? Jake's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the temper he usually kept so carefully controlled. This isn't about being perfect, Sarah. This is about being realistic. Madison and I, we have the same goals, the same ambitions. We understand each other in a way that you and I never did. We never understood each other? I asked, genuinely bewildered. Jake, I've supported every career move you've made. I've listened to you complain about your boss for hours. I've helped you practice presentations and proofread your emails and celebrated every small victory like it was my own. What part of that suggests I don't understand your ambitions? That's just it, Sarah. You support my ambitions, but you don't have any of your own. You're content to be the girlfriend, the cheerleader, the woman behind the man. Madison isn't like that. She's a partner, not just a supporter. The accusation hit me like a slap. mostly because there was enough truth in it to sting. I had been content to support Jake's career, while treating my own as secondary. I had prioritized his goals over mine, his timeline over mine, his dreams over mine. But that was what you did when you loved someone, wasn't it? That was what partnerships looked like. So because I put our relationship first, I'm not ambitious enough for you? Because you don't put yourself first. You're not the right fit for the life I want to build. The waiter appeared at our table, probably to check on our non-existent food order, but Jake waved him away with an impatient gesture. Around us, couples were sharing desserts and toasting their love, while we sat in the wreckage of mine. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fact that my hands were shaking slightly in my lap. "Any other character flaws you'd like to point out? Any other ways I failed to measure up to your new girlfriend?" Jake had the grace to look ashamed, though not ashamed enough to take any of it back. "Sarah, I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to be honest. I think if you're really honest with yourself, you'll admit that we've been growing apart for a while now." "Growing apart," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it when one person in a relationship starts having sex with someone else?" "Sarah, I'm curious, Jake. When exactly did we start growing apart? Was it before or after you started sleeping with Madison? Because from my perspective, we were doing just fine until you decided to stick your dick in your coworker." The crudeness of my language made Jake flinch, and I realized with a strange detachment that this was probably the first time in our 3-year relationship that I'd spoken to him with anything less than perfect politeness. Even during our rare arguments, I'd been careful to keep my voice down, to avoid saying anything that might hurt his feelings or damage his ego. Even when he was wrong, I'd found ways to make my points without making him feel attacked. How wonderfully accommodating I'd been. How perfectly trained to never disturb his comfort, even when he was destroying mine. "Look," Jake said, clearly eager to end this conversation and return to whatever Valentine's Day celebration he'd abandoned to deliver this news. "I know this is painful, but I think in the long run you'll see that this is better for both of us. You'll find someone who appreciates the kind of woman you are, and I'll find someone who appreciates the kind of man you are," I finished. "Someone who doesn't mind that you're a cheating liar with the moral backbone of a jellyfish." Jake's face darkened. "There's no need to be cruel, Sarah." "Cruel?" I laughed, and this time I didn't care who heard me. "You think I'm being cruel? Jake, you just told me that our entire relationship has been a lie, that you've been cheating on me for months, and that you're leaving me for another woman. On Valentine's Day. In a restaurant full of couples celebrating their love. And you think I'm the one being cruel? I think you're being dramatic." The word hit me like ice water, freezing every emotion except pure, crystalline rage. Dramatic. As if my pain was performative, as if my heartbreak was just another example of female hysteria that needed to be managed and contained. "Dramatic," I said softly, and Jake must have heard something dangerous in my tone because he leaned back slightly in his chair. "You want to see dramatic, Jake?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that cut through the restaurant's gentle ambiance like a knife. Every conversation around us paused as diners turned to look at the woman in the red dress who was clearly having some kind of breakdown. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying across the dining room with the clarity that came from years of delivering presentations to boardrooms full of skeptical executives, "I'd like to share a little Valentine's Day story with you." "Sarah, sit down," Jake hissed, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "My boyfriend of 3 years, Jake Carter here, just broke up with me. Tonight, on Valentine's Day, after cheating on me for 4 months with his coworker. Apparently, I'm not ambitious enough for him, though I'm ambitious enough to have spent the last 3 years supporting his career while he climbed the corporate ladder by screwing his way to the top." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Every eye was on our table. Every conversation had stopped. Every fork was suspended halfway to its owner's mouth. Jake looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear, while I felt more alive than I had in months. So here's to Jake Carter, everyone. Austin's newest head of West Coast sales, and a shining example of modern masculinity. May his new girlfriend in San Francisco appreciate his many talents, especially his ability to compartmentalize his personal life and his remarkable capacity for emotional honesty. I raised my wine glass in a mock toast, and after a moment of stunned silence, a woman at a nearby table actually started to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding, and not for Jake. "Sarah, stop!" Jake pleaded, his voice barely audible over the applause. "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said, smiling at him with the kind of bright, cheerful expression I usually reserved for client presentations. "But don't worry, Jake. I won't keep you from your celebration much longer. I'm sure Madison is waiting for you somewhere, probably wondering why you're taking so long to dispose of the old girlfriend." I dropped a $50 bill on the table, more than enough to cover my wine and his whiskey, and picked up my purse. "Happy Valentine's Day, everyone," I called out to the restaurant. "And remember, ladies, if a man can't appreciate what he has, there's always someone better waiting to appreciate what he's lost." The applause followed me all the way to the door, along with a few whistles and at least one, "You go, girl!" from someone I couldn't see. I walked through the Austin night air with my head high and my spine straight, not looking back to see if Jake was following me, or if he was still sitting at our table in stunned humiliation. It wasn't until I was safely locked in my car, driving through the empty streets toward my apartment, that I finally let myself cry. And when the tears came, they came like a flood, washing away 3 years of love and trust and shared dreams, leaving nothing behind but the strange, fierce determination to make sure that Jake Carter learned exactly what he'd thrown away. The first thing I noticed when I woke up the next morning was the silence. For 3 years, my mornings had been soundtracked by Jake's routine, the shower running at exactly 6:15, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the soft thud of his gym bag hitting the floor by the front door. Now there was nothing but the hum of traffic from South First Street and the distant sound of my upstairs neighbor's dog barking at squirrels. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the exposed brick wall that Jake had always claimed gave the loft character, but that I'd privately thought made it feel cold and industrial. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny galaxies. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday morning, when I'd been a woman in love, planning a romantic evening with her boyfriend. Now I was a woman who'd been publicly humiliated and abandoned, lying alone in an apartment that still smelled like his cologne. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since I'd turned it back on, a steady stream of texts and missed calls that I wasn't ready to deal with. Emma, my sister Jess, coworkers who'd probably heard through Austin's lightning-fast gossip network that Jake Carter had dumped his long-term girlfriend on Valentine's Day. The story was probably already making rounds at coffee shops and lunch meetings across the city, growing more dramatic with each retelling. It was almost noon when I finally dragged myself out of bed and stumbled to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I saw it. The manila envelope that someone had slipped under my door sometime during the night, my name written across the front in Jake's familiar handwriting. My heart did a brief, traitorous flutter of hope before reality crashed back down. He wasn't here to apologize or beg for forgiveness. This was probably just the logistical cleanup of our relationship. Lease agreements, shared credit card accounts, the mundane paperwork of untangling 3 years of combined lives. But when I opened the envelope, I found something else entirely. A stack of papers that made my coffee cup slip from my numb fingers and shatter against the concrete floor. Invitations. 50 printed invitations to Jake's farewell party, the party I'd been planning for 6 weeks as a surprise send-off before his move to San Francisco. The party that was supposed to happen tomorrow night at Skyline Austin, the rooftop bar with the best view of the city skyline, and a private room that had cost me a small fortune to reserve. The party where I'd planned to give a speech about supporting the dreams of the people you love, even when those dreams take them far away from you. The irony was so perfect, so exquisitely painful, that I actually laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. Here I was, heartbroken and humiliated, surrounded by 50 invitations to celebrate the career advancement of the man who'd destroyed my life less than 12 hours earlier. I'd already called the caterer, confirmed the bartender, arranged for a photographer to capture what I'd naively believed would be a beautiful tribute to love and ambition. Every detail had been planned with the kind of meticulous care that had made me so good at my job and, apparently, so inadequate as a girlfriend. My phone buzzed again, and this time I looked at it. A text from Emma. Saw Jake's LinkedIn update. Head of West Coast sales at NextGen, moving to SF. Are you okay? Call me. LinkedIn update. Of course, he'd already announced his promotion publicly, probably last night after leaving me in that restaurant. I opened the app with shaking fingers and found his post, complete with a professional headshot I'd taken of him just last month. Excited to announce my promotion to Head of West Coast Sales at NextGen Solutions. Looking forward to new challenges and opportunities in San Francisco. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag sales life, hashtag San Francisco. The comments were already pouring in. Congratulations from colleagues. Heart eye emojis from female coworkers I'd met at Christmas parties. Professional networking messages from people trying to get closer to Austin's rising sales star. And there, right at the top, was Madison Kelly's comment. So proud of you. Can't wait for our SF adventure. Red heart. Our SF adventure. She wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. In the harsh light of morning, their whole affair seemed almost aggressively public, as if they'd been flaunting it in front of everyone except me. How many people had known? How many conversations had I walked into that suddenly went quiet? How many pitying looks had I missed because I'd been too trusting, too naive, too focused on being the perfect supportive girlfriend, to notice that my boyfriend was building a completely different life behind my back? I scrolled through more comments, each one a reminder of how Jake's career success was being celebrated while my personal devastation was just unfortunate collateral damage. Then I saw something that made me stop scrolling entirely. A comment from Patricia Sullivan, CEO of NextGen Solutions. Congratulations, Jake. We're excited to see what you accomplish in San Francisco. Sarah Torres did beautiful work on our marketing strategy. You're lucky to have such talented people in your life. Patricia Sullivan knew who I was. Not only did she know who I was, she'd specifically mentioned my work in a public comment on Jake's promotion announcement. I stared at the comment for a long time, trying to process what it meant. Patricia Sullivan was a legend in Austin's tech scene, a woman who'd built NextGen from a garage startup into a multi-million-dollar company that competed with firms 3 times its size. If she knew my work, if she thought it was beautiful, I set my phone down and walked to my laptop, stepping carefully around the broken coffee cup that still littered the kitchen floor. Patricia Sullivan's comment had planted a seed of something I couldn't quite name yet, something that felt like possibility wrapped in determination. I opened my computer and started researching. NextGen Solutions. Founded in 2008 by Patricia Sullivan, a former IBM executive who'd moved to Austin to be closer to her aging parents. Annual revenue of $47 million, with projected growth of 30% over the next 2 years. Primary business focus on customer relationship management software for mid-size companies. Recent expansion into the West Coast market, with particular emphasis on tech startups in San Francisco and Los Angeles. I clicked through page after page of information, absorbing details about market share and client retention rates, and competitive positioning. This wasn't idle curiosity anymore. This was research with a purpose I couldn't yet articulate, but could definitely feel building in my chest, like pressure before a storm. Then I found the article that changed everything. A piece in Austin Business Journal from 3 months ago, an interview with Patricia Sullivan about NextGen's expansion strategy. The headline read, "NextGen CEO says success depends on finding the right marketing partners." I read the article twice, then 3 times, paying particular attention to a quote that seemed to jump off the screen. We've learned that internal marketing teams, no matter how talented, can't provide the objective perspective that external consultants bring to the table. Our most successful campaigns have come from partnerships with independent marketing firms that understand our industry but aren't constrained by our corporate culture. Independent marketing firms. External consultants. Partnerships. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom, where my Northwestern University diploma hung in a frame that Jake had bought me for my birthday 2 years ago. Bachelor of Science in Marketing, magna cum laude. 4 years of studying consumer psychology and brand strategy and market analysis. followed by 5 years of climbing the corporate ladder at 3 different companies before landing at NextGen. 5 years of building campaigns that exceeded their targets, developing strategies that outperformed their projections, creating content that generated measurable results for every client I'd ever worked with. Jake thought I lacked ambition. He thought I was content to be a supporting player in someone else's success story. He thought I didn't have goals of my own, dreams of my own, the kind of drive that would take me to the top of my industry. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he'd been. I spent the rest of the afternoon on my laptop, researching everything I could find about independent marketing consultancies in Austin. The market was competitive but not saturated, with most of the established firms focusing on either large corporate clients or small local businesses. There was a gap in the middle market, especially for companies that needed sophisticated strategy work but couldn't afford the retainer fees that the big agencies charged. Companies like NextGen Solutions. By evening, I had the rough outline of a business plan sketched out in a notebook I'd found in Jake's old desk drawer. Torres Strategic Solutions, a boutique marketing consultancy specializing in tech companies with annual revenues between $10 and $50 million. Services would include brand strategy, digital marketing, content creation, and campaign management. Initial target market would be Austin-based companies looking to expand into new markets or launch new products. It was ambitious, maybe impossibly so. Starting a consulting firm required capital I didn't have, clients I hadn't cultivated, and a level of professional confidence that had been badly shaken by Jake's assessment of my character. But as I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by the detritus of my former life, his coffee mugs in the sink, his magazines on the coffee table, his spare phone charger still plugged into the wall, I felt something stirring that was stronger than doubt. I felt angry. Not the messy, emotional anger of last night, but something cleaner and more focused. Jake had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't ambitious enough for him. He'd dismissed 3 years of love and partnership because he didn't think I had the drive to be his equal. He'd chosen Madison Kelly over me because she was a partner, not just a supporter. He was about to learn what kind of partner I could have been if he'd been smart enough to see it. I picked up my phone and opened a new text message to Emma. "Can you come over? I have an idea, and I need someone to tell me if I'm crazy or brilliant." Her response came back immediately. "On my way. Wine or tequila?" "Champagne," I typed back. "We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I looked around the apartment one more time, taking in the exposed brick and industrial fixtures that had never felt like home, the furniture we'd chosen together, but that had always reflected his taste more than mine, the carefully curated life we'd built that had apparently been nothing more than a placeholder for him. "New beginnings," I wrote, "and the end of settling for less than I deserve." Emma arrived 30 minutes later with a bottle of Veuve Clicquot and a determined expression that told me she was ready for whatever I was about to propose. I'd known Emma since we were 7 years old, and she'd seen me through every major decision of my adult life: college applications, job changes, the decision to move in with Jake. She was the only person who'd ever called me out when I was being too accommodating, too willing to bend my own needs around someone else's preferences. "Okay," she said, settling onto my couch with 2 champagne flutes and the bottle already open. "Talk to me. What's the plan?" I told her everything. The farewell party invitations that had arrived like a cosmic joke. Patricia Sullivan's comment on Jake's LinkedIn post. The business plan that had been forming in my head all afternoon. The idea that was either brilliant or insane, depending on how you looked at it. "So let me get this straight," Emma said when I'd finished talking. "You want to start your own marketing firm, with NextGen as your first major client, and use Jake's farewell party as your launching pad? That's the general idea. And you think Patricia Sullivan will hire you based on one LinkedIn comment?" "I think Patricia Sullivan will hire me based on the results I've delivered for her company over the past 2 years, and the strategic approach I'm going to present to her on Monday morning." Emma was quiet for a long moment, swirling champagne in her glass and studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. "Sarah," she said finally, "this is either the most brilliant revenge plot I've ever heard, or you're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe both. What about the party? You've already put down deposits, hired vendors, Invited 50 people to celebrate Jake's promotion. Are you really going to go through with it? I thought about that for a moment, imagining Jake's face when he realized that his farewell party was happening as scheduled, hosted by the ex-girlfriend he'd dismissed as unambitious. Imagining the conversations that would happen in that room, the networking opportunities, the chance to position myself as someone who rose above personal drama to honor professional commitments. "Oh, I'm definitely going through with it," I said, raising my champagne glass in a toast. "But it's not going to be Jake's party anymore. It's going to be mine." The first crack in my support system appeared at exactly 8:30 Monday morning, when I walked into the next-gen offices with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder and a presentation deck that had kept me awake until 3 a.m. I'd spent the weekend perfecting my pitch to Patricia Sullivan, crafting a proposal for Torres Strategic Solutions that was part business plan, part marketing strategy, and part subtle demonstration of exactly what Jake had been too blind to see. The open office concept that had always felt energizing before suddenly seemed like a fishbowl designed specifically for my humiliation. Conversations stopped as I walked past desks toward my own workspace, and I could feel the weight of curious stares following me like spotlights. By now, everyone knew about Jake's promotion and his very public relationship with Madison. What they didn't know was that I'd been dumped via restaurant breakdown on Valentine's Day, though I was sure the gossip network would fill in those details soon enough. Madison was already at her desk, looking polished and professional in a way that seemed almost aggressively perfect. Her blonde hair was styled in beachy waves that probably took an hour to achieve but looked effortlessly casual. Her makeup was flawless but natural, her outfit expensive but understated. She was the picture of a successful young professional who definitely hadn't spent the weekend crying over a broken relationship and eating ice cream straight from the container. She looked up when I passed her desk, and for a moment, our eyes met across the open office space. I saw something flicker in her expression, guilt, maybe, or anxiety about how I might react to seeing her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.